Okay, here's the last of the 3 installments, video lectures on social behavior as we start to apply this to urban sociology. This was the last slide that you saw for the second PowerPoint. So now we're moving on to some more specific research. And again, just like with the first 2 PowerPoint presentations, pause this at your leisure, take good notes. I do not have a shelf for this for you. So you'll want to just kind of jot this down and make sure you have this with your notes. Now, there's a ton of research on stereotypes. I'm going to try to make this simpler, or as simple as I can. Here's basically the big stuff that we know about stereotypes. Okay, and we've already talked about the definition of a stereotype. There are these cognitive frameworks suggesting that all members of social groups share certain characteristics. Okay, for example, all Asians are smart. All black people like fried chicken. Okay, all Jewish people are cheap. Or frugal. These are stereotypes, and sometimes they can be seen as being very offensive. And generally speaking, stereotypes are, again, negatively connotated. So, here's what we know. First of all, A, information relevant to a particular stereotype is processed more quickly than information unrelated to it. So, we notice information that lines up with what society teaches us about what a stereotype means. So, we notice things that fit the stereotype first. Next, stereotypes lead us to pay attention to specific types of information, usually information consistent with the stereotypes. So the way that stereotypes are constructed within society, that forces us to sort of pay attention just to specific things, which generally lead, right into the stereotype as we understand it. Next, when information inconsistent with stereotypes does manage to get into our awareness or our consciousness, we generally refute it or simply deny it. So when you see the exception to the rule, if you will, when it comes to stereotypes, like for example, people have a notion of what African Americans are like. They're dangerous, they're drug dealers, they like rap music. A horrible stereotype. Okay, now this person sees something that's inconsistent with that stereotype. They see an educated African American male, for example, who listens to classical music. A lot of times this is just simply refuted. People tend to just ignore that information that does not match up nicely with the stereotype. When people encounter letter D, when people encounter individuals who behave in ways counter to stereotypes, even if we do manage to sort of process it, we perceive these people as a new subtype of the stereotype instead of the exception to the rule, or instead of just dismantling this stereotypical idea that we have of a group of people, whether it's based on race, or ethnicity, like with African Americans, like we've been talking about, or immigrants in cities, or people in upper classes or lower classes in cities. So how can we minimize the negative impact of stereotyping, prejudice, and discrimination in cities or anywhere? Well, the contact hypothesis. What is that? Well, I love this term because it kind of defines itself. Contact hypothesis simply suggests that increased contact between members of different groups will reduce the prejudice between them. If you've ever seen the movie Remember the Titans, it's the best example I can think of for the contact hypothesis. If you've seen the movie, you have a football coach, Denzel Washington, an African American coach, whose job it is in this high school is to bring together the black and the white football players during a time where there's a lot of racial tension between African Americans and Caucasians. He forces them together. He forces them to sit together on the buses for the camps. He forces them to room together during the camps, forces them to play together. And it's a big problem at first, but the more they're around each other, if you've seen the movie, the more they start to really sort of reduce those prejudices. And really, in the end, they actually forge some pretty strong friendships with each other, regardless of race. So that's the idea. And in cities, you've seen it for a long time. You have diversity in cities more than anywhere else. People from different parts of the world, immigrants from all over the world who end up in big cities, they are forced to have contact with each other. So you see maybe less racial tension, less ethnic tensions in cities than you do in rural areas, where rural areas are more homogenous. People are more alike, as opposed to cities, people are more diverse. So the idea is that forcing people together can reduce these prejudices. The contact hypothesis suggests that increased contact between people from different groups can lead to a growing recognition that similarities can exist between them. Perceived similarity can generate mutual attraction. So if you think you're different from someone, if you're from the country, or if you're from the city, wherever, and you start associating with people, and I see this on campuses, I see people who are from big cities, they come to West Virginia State University, and they start taking classes in this rural area, and a lot of them will always say, well, at first it was kind of strange, it was like weird, I didn't have anything in common with these people who are from, West Virginia. But over time, you start to see that there are similarities. They start to understand there are common threads that unite themselves with people who are from more rural areas. And they actually start to form friendships with people who are from this area. So it can happen. Also, stereotypes can be altered when people encounter sufficient information inconsistent with the stereotype. So if we see enough evidence that goes against the stereotypes that we have built up, whether it's of rich people in cities or poor people in cities or African Americans, racial minorities in cities, if we see opposing information enough, if we see enough black people who aren't in jail or are not in prison, who are not dealing drugs, who are successful, who are working in the business district of these cities, then we can start to think, wait a minute, maybe this stereotype isn't right. Maybe all African Americans in inner cities are not drug dealers, So, for example, increased contact with members of outgroups may take away the illusion that all members of a stereotype group are more alike. So again, the more contact you have with people who are different from you, these outgroups, it removes the idea that members of the outgroup are all alike in sort of a negative or adversarial way. And this is all research-based. The contact hypothesis works the best when hostile groups interacting, whether it's based on social class, race, ethnicity, gender, whatever in cities, are first of all roughly equal in social status. That helps. If you get poor versus rich, they're not equal in social status, and forcing them together may not work. Okay. Also, are cooperative and interdependent. If you get people from different walks of life who are, first of all, roughly equal in social status, but also forced into a cooperative, interdependent situation, like work, for example, like an office, for example, then it can work. This can be effective. And also, it works best when you have norms that are in place that favor group equality. So, again, this is all research-based. And then we end with the extended contact hypothesis, another social psychological term. This is the suggestion that merely informing people that members of their own group have formed close friendships with people from an outgroup can reduce prejudice. Well, let me explain. That's kind of a convoluted definition. This suggests that people within our group, okay, I'm going to identify with you listening to this video and others as we have a group, our group. We are prejudiced against the other urban sociology class that meets the other days during the week because they're not as good as us, right? Now, you've had no contact with them, okay? But inherently, we tend to think of our own group as being a little bit better than others. So, I go across the hallway and I interact with the other urban sociology class, and I come back and I tell you guys, you know what? They're really not that bad. They have a lot in common with us. They're struggling. They're trying to work. They're going to school. They're not that bad. Just me telling you that can lessen your prejudices against the other group across the hallway, the other class across the hallway, even though you have had no actual contact with that group. So that kind of gives you an example. So if I'm from the country and I travel to a city and this happened, and I interact with people in the city, I come to find out, you know what? People in cities aren't as bad as I've been told. They're not all rude. They're not all, drug dealers. There's not all these rapes and murders going on around you all the time. These are stereotypes. So when I come back home, I start telling my family members and my friends, it wasn't that bad when I traveled to New York City or Chicago or wherever I went. It's really, people were nice. I mean, yeah, you have crime and you have problems, but it's not everywhere that you look necessarily. And just me telling my family and my friends this sort of lessened some of their biases against specific groups in cities, even though they had never had contact with these groups of people in cities. So I hope I've done a good job trying to relay these important social psychological concepts to you. Make sure you have these in your notes. These are important. and we'll call this the end of the final installment of 3 with the social behavior PowerPoint lecture for urban sociology, West Virginia State University. Thank you.